to CBS Reportes, El Poder, the power. I'm Adriana Diaz, and for the next half hour, we'll take you inside America's Latino communities to find out what's changing about their political power and sense of identity. I'm in Pilsen in Chicago, one of the oldest Mexican-American neighborhoods in the Midwest. This is a cultural enclave, like many, where El Poder de Latinos is on full display. As our community prepares to use that power in the midterms, a CBS News poll found that 53% plan to vote Democrat and 34% Republican. But what's motivating them is as vast and varied as who we are as people. It's the ability to afford groceries for the Latinos at O'Keefe Meats in Virginia. Down south, Omar Villafranca shows us how border security has some blue counties thinking red. In Florida, foreign affairs are top of mind, as Enrique Acevedo reports. And in California, Lilia Luciano takes us to where Latinos are using a vehicle you may not expect to mobilize. So what's at stake? And how will Latinos respond?
Peppered between the oaks and palm trees of the mostly Hispanic Rio Grande Valley, red is popping up on the landscape.
So you're going all red?
Republican voters.
Oh, great, thank you.
Appreciate your vote.
At the Hidalgo County GOP headquarters, volunteers are phone banking for a slate of Latino Republicans in this heavily Democratic region, something once unheard of.
When you see people coming in on a weekday, what does that tell you about the message that Republicans are putting out?
It means that it's working. Thank you for speaking up for our conservative values.
Adrian Peña Garza hopes her territory may be turning from blue to purple as more conservative Latinos become energized by one man, Donald Trump.
The wall is being built as we speak.
So border security is very important to us, with the economy, family, faith, and freedom. I mean, that's the messaging that's been working for us.
The border looms large here. That means border security is a big issue with voters. Government data shows that this fiscal year, the Border Patrol made more than 400,000 arrests in the Rio Grande Valley, a record for this sector.
The biggest misconception is that we are a cartel-run, open borders, crime-ridden community. That is absolutely not true.
Democrat Richard Gonzalez's party is now on defense because his party's key issues, abortion, gun control, and the environment, are not as important to some as the economy, crime, and immigration.
America is worth defending!
Which are the focus for the Republicans.
The national message was basically, hey, the Valley is just an open borders area. It's full of illegal immigrants. They're taking your jobs, they're taking your money.
Republicans also accused the Democrats of taking voters for granted. Mayra Flores is their proof. Flores, who is married to a Border Patrol agent, flipped an open congressional seat red last June.
Congratulations, you are now a member of the Alliance.
And became the first Mexican-born woman ever to serve in Congress. Her campaign spent over $1 million to do it.
The Republican Party is investing in the Hispanic community because they understand that the Hispanic community is the future of this country.
It's likely the Democrats will take back the seat this November. Still, the Republicans sense a new momentum, says political science professor Mark Caswan.
Her chances of winning are maybe like 40%, which is astounding given past performance.
Voters like Selena Tafoya were raised as a Democrat and were starting to quietly choose Republicans. She's not keeping quiet anymore.
Your loyalty isn't to a political party. Your loyalty is God. And that's why you should be voting red, because it aligns with our values.
From the roar,
sounds healthy.
Sounds healthy, huh? Yeah.
To the bouncing hydraulics, low riding is all about being seen and heard. But for Gabe Mijares in Sacramento, cruising slow and low is also an invitation.
Tell me the importance of bringing out your car and the lowrider community showing up to get people to vote.
Yeah, I think, the Chicano community, I think it's important that they know that our voices and our numbers count. Like, we need to be out there and we need to vote.
Mijares and other lowriders are joining forces with Brown Issues, a group that mobilizes and motivates young Latinos to vote.
Not only are Latino youth voters ready to get out and vote, but we also have young people who are owning that power.
Jacqueline Martinez Garcel, CEO of the leadership-focused Latino Community Foundation, says that power resonates far beyond California.
How would you describe the power of the Latino vote here in California?
So Latinos can determine the balance of power in Congress after this midterm election. There are 4 toss-up congressional districts. And if Latinos turn out to vote, we will determine whether or not we have a majority, Democrat or Republican.
But to impact the balance of power, Latinos need to show up. In California, they're the largest ethnic group, and there are nearly 6 million registered voters. But only roughly 15% of them voted in June's primary election. That's the lowest turnout for any ethnic group.
When we invest in these grassroots orgs that are training young people to organize and mobilize, we do turn out to vote.
And Sacramento lowriders got a taste of that power last May when they mobilized to repeal a decades-old ordinance that criminalized their car culture by banning cruising.
And you also got a caring heart.
Something Carlos Molina III says was born from stereotypes that painted lowriders as gang members.
When the meetings were taking place, you saw every club represented. I think that demonstrates strength to re-engage with the institution and elected officials who were at fault for criminalizing you.
And with that victory came more drive.
You're wearing the voter t-shirt. Why is it important for you to make that statement?
As someone coming from a mixed status family, I'm the only one who can vote in my family, so I had to recognize the power I carry within my vote.
Showing that the ultimate driving force is feeling seen and heard. Just like when you're cruising slow and low.
When something starts on the street, like with this lowrider and folks weren't voter, it starts with the grassroots and then it's gonna end up at the grass tops because culture shifts policy and that's important.
In Florida, Latino voters are keeping a firm grip on the American dream. But migrants from politically oppressed countries fear that growing public support for policies they label as socialism could warp that dream into a nightmare.
My parents lived fairly middle class in Venezuela, but when socialism hit in the late 90s and the early 2000s, they grew poor almost instantaneously.
18-year-old Samuel Morales was born in Miami, where he grew up listening to stories about what life was like in Venezuela.
The trash, the devastation, the poverty.
His parents immigrated to Florida 20 years ago, but he says the humanitarian and political crisis in Venezuela remains a deeply personal issue for him and his family.
You're still, in many ways, shaped by what happened and what happens every day in Venezuela.
How could I not? Shape the way I view the world and shape the way I view politics and ideologies.
Exiled communities have historically found safe haven in South Florida, from Cubans fleeing the Castro regime in the 60s to the Venezuelan diaspora established here since the early 2000s.
It's one of those things where that generation very much thinks of never forget. I always remember, because it could happen here.
The son of Cuban refugees, TJ Villamil, was drawn to the Republican Party, due in large part to the GOP's hawkish stance against the island's regime.
This word democratic socialism, and that's a huge red flag for Latinos and Hispanics that are living in America that all experience that.
There's been an apparent shift to the right among Latino voters in crucial electoral districts across the country. Issues like the economy and immigration are all top of mind.
But more and more, identity, religion, and even country of origin are playing a major role in how these conservative voters are turning out. And nowhere is that more evident than here in South Florida.
I think that is something that has benefited Republicans. You saw Trump taking some very decisive actions in terms of Venezuela. You saw him rolling back a lot of the Obama-era policies relative to Cuba. And if you look at the math electorally, he won Miami-Dade County by 300,000 more votes in 2020 than he won in 2016.
Miami's Republican Mayor, Francis Suarez, says Latino voters in Florida recognize that it's not just about contrasting policies, but a competition between two core philosophies.
I think that there's a thought that Democrats just aren't connecting. I think the Latinx attempted branding of the Hispanic community did not resonate.
You were saying that in 2020 you weren't 18, so you couldn't vote, but you had a favorite candidate. Who was that?
Obviously, former President Donald Trump.
Talking politics might not come without its challenges around the dinner table. But even in this politically charged environment, family comes first for Samuel.
You know, at the end of the day, they're still family. I love them. But, you know, sometimes it has to be said because people need to know.
But it's important that you know that you're still family. And
yeah, of course, of course.
I'm at O'Keefe in Woodbridge, Virginia, about 40 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., working class community. And one of the areas in this competitive state where Democrats and Republicans come looking for the elusive Latino voter. We found plaza after shopping plaza of family-owned businesses, like Dina Colindre's Tienda y Joyería, and visited this competitive congressional district to find out if and why Latinos will vote. Of course, Dina says, in fact, the Hispanic community is waking up. For the good and the bad, she says. The good and the bad for Latino voters is certainly felt inside Todos supermarket. You sell Presidente.
Yeah.
But you also have to sell Famosa.
Exactly.
And you got to sell Victoria. Salvadoran Carlos Castro is CEO.
A ver, ¿quién tiene...
In Woodbridge, Latinos are the majority, and those on either side of the cash register have pressing economic needs. So you own a supermarket. Obviously, the cost of things has been on the minds of everybody, whether it's gas or other services. All of your prices have probably gone up this year, right?
Yeah. Look at meat, for instance. It used to be like $4 or $5 a pound, depending on the cut. Now it's like $11.
Delmes Benitez tells us her top priority is to afford her weekly shopping cart of food. Now, most things cost double. How about juice, for example? ¿Cuánto cuesta jugo ahora? How much does it cost now?
Vale $9, valía $5.
So it went from 5 to 9.
Yep.
And that brings us to the fight for Virginia's 7th Congressional District.
I welcome any effort
Here,
that can deliver
incumbent
lower
Abigail
drug prices
Spanberger,
for the people I serve. It is worth our time.
a Democrat,
I know the struggles families face.
is running against Republican challenger Yesli Vega.
I've always been a conservative fighter, and now I'm running for Congress.
Both candidates will need Latino voters in order to win. Back at Dina's Tienda, she hopes that change comes, that the situation improves. And up the street, Carlos just wants practical solutions.
In elections, what do? Just blame the other guy.
Right, yeah.
But they don't say how they're gonna fix the problem. I think what we need, Republicans and Democrats and independents, is to go back and work for the people. Leave out the partisan fight, the partisan bickering, and actually come up with solutions. It's so easy.
Next, Latinx, Hispanic, Afro-Latino, a look at the diversity of our community. Welcome back to CBS Reportes El Poder. I'm Adriana Diaz in Humboldt Park, Chicago, which, as you can tell, is the symbolic center of Chicago's Puerto Rican pride. Proud Latinos are expanding the vocabulary of how we define ourselves. Skyler Henry and Manuel Bojorquez examine terms like Afro-Latino and Latinx. Words matter, but what about language? That's a question Enrique Acevedo explores with Latinos who don't speak Spanish. As our next story shows, Latinos are making more room for themselves.
We're in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, also known as Little Panama. A largely Afro-Latino community, it's been here for decades and is rooted in traditions and the people essential to the formation of the Panama Canal.
My forefathers, my ancestors, my grandfathers, they made Panama.
Roman Foster is a historian and documentarian on Panamanian culture and has made it his mission to tell the story of the 100,000 black workers who were brought in from the Caribbean to build the canal. Many stayed, creating a new community.
How do you identify? I see myself as a Caribbean Latino mix.
It's the best of both worlds.
Yes.
Roman's story is my family's story. I was born not too far from the neighborhood in nearby Flatbush to Panamanian parents. But the history of Afro-Latinos in the United States dates back much further and is rooted in pain and sacrifice. During the Atlantic slave trade, more than 90% of the Africans brought to the Americas arrived in the Caribbean and South America, where they mixed with the indigenous and European people to create their own Afro-Latino culture, and like many before them, migrated to the United States. But like any other cultura, Afro-Latinos aren't a monolith. The Pew Research Center says there are 6 million adults living in the U.S. who recognize themselves as Afro-Latinos. Now, if you catch the New York City subway uptown to Dyckman, the majority of the 1.1 million Dominicans who put down roots in the New York metro area live here, uptown, including 29-year-old Claudia Mendoza. Her identity is rebuilding a new sense of pride that includes conversations with her own family about color.
I started challenging my family and being like, hey, you guys know you're black, right? And then that's when they were like, no, we're Dominican, like, what are you talking about?
Oh.
Yeah, and I understood that it wasn't coming from a place of malice. It was coming from a place of, this is what you've grown up knowing your entire life.
Which is why she created the Mami Chula Social Club, a multi-generational space pairing younger members with mature women, breaking down what was taught.
I wanted to become a space for women of color, Latinas, Black Latinas, to be joyful and be happy through community, through events, through having difficult conversations like this.
New life lessons she's learning and teaching.
What are you most proud of about being Afro-Latina, Dominicana?
Our resilience and the fact that we are able to survive the darkest moments and create such beauty and create hope for the future.
It definitely felt to me like I was in a fog and I had no idea how to describe it. And then it was a light bulb moment. That's what it is.
Rodrigo Heng Leitnan came out as a transgender man in 2007. He was 21 years old.
I never felt that we lost a daughter and gained a son. Whether it's Amanda Michelle or Rodrigo, it's still the same individual whom I love. I don't love the gender, I love the person.
Love didn't make this moment any easier for Ileana Ross Leitnan.
We were stunned, we were shocked, we had a lot of questions, we had a lot of discussions, but it's been over 16 years now.
Rodrigo's father, Dexter.
It may be a little harder to understand, but to accept and be supportive, that's not hard at all.
Ileana was the first Latina elected to Congress. The Cuban-American represented South Florida's 18th and 27th districts as a Republican for 30 years.
I don't think that we were really worried about the political consequences. I think we were worried about the social fabric of our family.
Salud!
Salud!
The construct of Latino families in America is changing now. But back then, when Rodrigo came out, his story was practically one of the first for our community to mirror.
Our son is transgender. We loved him as Amanda and now as Rodrigo.
Say you're the parent of a transgender kid who's just come out and you're trying to find that information and you're looking it up in Spanish, you'll find very little materials out there that actually give you accurate information and that show other Latino families like you.
Family is family. Family is everything. Love is love. And we want our kids to be healthy and accepted and safe. Maybe that was a bold and controversial step, but we were so glad to have done it, and it needs to be repeated over and over again.
I believe in respecting the dignity of our LGBTQ+ youth.
Although more and more Latinos are supporting family members in the LGBTQ+ community, some cultural pushback remains for reasons like deeply held religious beliefs and conservative values. That's why accurate information on how to treat trans individuals is pivotal.
It's a way to not have that gender distinction, Latina or Latino.
And if someone is non-binary, which means that they don't identify with either of those two genders, then they're Latinx or Latina.
With more room in our language to describe the people we love, there is now more space for honesty and acceptance.
to especially Latino parents and Latino families, for that young man or woman to say, be honest, you know your family well, so you know what they can or can't handle, but they might surprise you that they'd be able to handle a lot more than you give them credit for.
Jillian Salas proudly describes herself as Mexican American. Raised not far from Los Angeles, she's never shied away from her cultural roots.
I do sports and entertainment publicity. I've noticed plenty of times where I was the only Latina in the room.
As she fought to dispel stereotypes throughout her career, she also faced an internal struggle.
It's always a constant, like, how am I going to present myself as a Mexican American and without speaking the language?
Language plays a crucial role in how Latinos describe ourselves. But younger generations are not fluent in Spanish, and that's causing an identity crisis for some fighting to represent their community. The share of U.S.-born Latinos who speak Spanish at home has declined from 66% to 55% in the last 2 decades, according to the Pew Research Center. Jillian's mom, Guadalupe Salas, immigrated from Guadalajara, Mexico, while Jillian's dad was a first-generation Mexican-American. But she says pressure to assimilate and systemic discrimination forced her family to abandon Spanish.
He always just talked to them in English.
Though Latinos have been essential to the nation's economic growth, there's a long history of anti-Latino sentiment. Even Latinos who were U.S. citizens were barred entry into establishments, with language often used as a tool for discrimination.
Students would go into classrooms, and if they spoke the Spanish language, there could be corporal punishment. A lot of parents who went through that and had the pain of going through school systems like that chose not to teach their children the Spanish language.
Associate history professor at Princeton, Rosina Lozano, documented the mistreatment in her book, An American Language, The History of Spanish in the U.S.
So for these families, it's also a way of saying, it's not you that you didn't do something right. This is something that has been, in many ways, forced upon you.
Absolutely. There's a larger structural community, like the legal structure, the political structure, all of these different things come together to let people feel that they cannot have their children speaking the language comfortably.
Despite the new renaissance of embracing the duality of U.S. and Latino cultures, generations that were caught in between are still struggling.
You don't feel Mexican enough and you don't feel American enough. When I was a kid and trying to speak Spanish like my aunts or uncles, and then my cousins would make fun of me, I just freeze.
For Jillian, the generational importance of Spanish transcended her insecurities when her grandmother died.
She passed away in Mexico about 10 years ago.
And she's from the epicenter of what we think of as Mexican culture, right?
Yes, not being able to communicate with her, that's something I still hold in the back of my mind to this day.
To honor her heritage, Jillian is now intent on passing the language down to future generations.
I want to be a part of that too, make it generational, and hopefully next generation that starts with myself and my siblings, and be really connected to Guadalajara.
This diverse community has the power, el poder, to swing elections and shape the future of a country they've contributed to for generations. Generations of Latinos built this Mexican-American community of Little Village. The glue is culture, family, and a strong sense of Latino identity, no matter which term you use. I'm Adriana Diaz. For all of our colleagues at CBS News, thank you for watching CBS Reportes El Poder. Gracias por estar con nosotros.